intentionally calming and boring bedtime story, perfect for falling asleep. Enjoy. For the best experience, I recommend lowering the volume until my voice is just a whisper, barely audible. This will make the journey even more relaxing and soothing. The images on screen are only gentle guides, but the true magic happens when you close your eyes and let your imagination bring the story to life. Support the channel by liking and subscribing, which means you can be opposed, can be defeated. The pendant flared suddenly, its light expanding outward in a sphere that pushed against the void thing's presence. The creature recoiled, its form destabilizing further as it retreated toward the cave entrance. "This changes nothing," it insisted, voice fading as its presence diminished. "The binding weakens. The darkness in the south grows stronger. Time runs against you, elf. Then we will make better use of what remains than you anticipate," Torian replied, holding the pendant higher. Its light filled the cave now, driving back shadows, both natural and otherwise. The void thing dissolved completely, leaving only an echo of its final words hanging in the frigid air. "We will meet again at the end of all things." Torian stood alone in the ice cave, the pendant's light gradually subsiding to its previous soft glow. Outside, the northern lights continued their dance across the sky, but they seemed different now, their patterns more deliberate, as if responding to the confrontation that had just occurred. He sat back on the ice platform, mind racing despite the lingering effects of the ritual tea. The apparition had confirmed their worst fierce binding was indeed weakening. The void creatures were finding ways through, and Sauron was somehow involved, perhaps actively collaborating with these entities from beyond reality. But it had also revealed something crucial. The ritual they sought to perform was feared by these void entities. They would not have attempted to discourage him if the components they sought water from Olmo's wells, the earth from Angban's foundations, the flame from All's Forgested, not pose a genuine threat to their plans, which meant there was hope, however slim, if they could complete the ritual before the binding failed completely, before the connections between the relics grew too strong to sever. Torian's thoughts were interrupted by a new presence at the cave. Entrance are not the void thing returning, but a human figure silhouetted against the night sky. A woman, tall for her people, wearing robes of white fur decorated with bones and shells that clicked softly as she moved. "You have faced the void and remained yourself," she said in heavily accented but understandable Western. "Few outsiders manage this feat, Kaya," Torian guessed, recognizing that this must be the priestess they had sought. She inclined her head slightly. "Daughter of Kaya, keeper of the old ways, guardian of that which was entrusted to my ancestors in the time before time." "You speak the common tongue," Torian observed, surprised after the communication difficulties they had experienced with the other Losath. "I speak many tongues," she replied. "The ice preserves knowledge as it preserves all things, and those who walk between worlds must understand the speech of many peoples." She entered the cave fully, moving with a grace that belied her heavy clothing. Up close, Torian could see that she was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps 30 summers, with eyes that reflected the northern lights like pools of still water. "The entity that visited you," she said, gesturing to where the void thing had stood. It wore a face familiar to you. A friend lost to darkness. Yes, Torian confirmed, though it was not truly him. No, the void dwellers steal faces from our memories, wear them like masks to gain our trust or break our resolve. She studied him with those reflective eyes. Yet you resisted. The light you carry, she nodded, toward the pendant. It holds power, they fear. It was given to me by a watcher at the crossroads, Torian explained. One who called himself Iwendel in ages past. Recognition flickered in Kaya's expression. The brown one. He has visited our people in times of great change, though not within my lifetime. If he has given you this token, your cause must indeed be significant. It is, Torian assured her. The binding that holds an ancient evil begins to fail. Creatures from the void find ways into our world through the influence of relics tied to that binding. We seek components for a ritual that might strengthen the containment, prevent a full incursion, and one such component is in my keeping, Kaya surmised. The water from Olmo's wells. Yes, the watcher, Iwendel said, you would know of it. Kaya was silent for a long moment, her gaze turning toward the northern lights visible through the cave entrance. The water has been in my people's keeping since the world was remade, she said finally, brought here by those who fled the drowning of their homeland, entrusted to my ancestors with warnings that it should never leave these shores except in the direst need. That need is now, Torian said. The void creatures spread corruption wherever they gain a foothold. If the binding fails completely, nowhere will be safe or not, even these northern wastes. I have seen signs of this corruption, Kaya admitted. Waters that run black beneath the ice, animals born twisted and wrong, hunters who do not return from their journeys. The elders speak of similar occurrences in the time of our oldest stories, when darkness fell from the north rather than creeping from the south. She turned back to Torian, decision evident in her posture. I will take you to the water at dawn. But no thisset can be carried only in vessels of pure crystal, untouched by mortal craft. And once removed from its resting place, its power begins to diminish. You will have one turning of the moon to use it before it becomes merely ordinary water. We understand, Torian assured her. We have prepared for this journey for weeks, and will waste no time once the water is in our possession. Then rest what remains of the night, Kaya advised. The ritual tea's effects will fade by morning, and you will need your strength for what lies ahead. She departed as silently as she had arrived, leaving Torian alone once more in the ice cave. Outside, the northern lights continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed to carry a different message in it, warning, but urgency. Time was running short, for them and for all of Tyranor. Dawn came with painful brightness, sunlight reflecting off ice and snow with blinding intensity. The lost shaman returned as promised, seeming unsurprised to find Torian not only alive but clear-eyed and composed. He led the elf back down to the encampment, where the others waited with barely contained anxiety. You succeeded, Arista observed, with evident relief. We feared the worst when strange lights were seen around your cave during the night. I faced a visitor from the void, Torian confirmed, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard by the Losath gathering nearby. It confirmed our suspicions binding weakens, and void creatures seek entry to our world. Worse, they appear to be in communication with the darkness in the south. Sauron, Linda whispered, his expression grim, as Lord Elrond feared. But I also learned something important, Torian continued. The ritual components we seek thee genuinely threaten the void creature's plans. The entity tried to discourage me, to convince me our efforts were futile. It would not have bothered if that were truly the case. This news brought cautious hope to their small company, as they shared a morning meal provided by their Losith hosts. Torian explained his encounter with Kaya and her agreement to take them to the water from Olmo's wells. One turning of the moon, Haleth repeated thoughtfully. That gives us perhaps 28 days to return to Rivendell and prepare for the journey to the second component. Less, Damrod corrected. The moon is already past half. We have 20 days, at most, before the water loses its power. Then we must make haste, Arista decided. Once we have the water, we return south with all possible speed. Kaya arrived as they finished their meal, now dressed in ceremonial robes, even more elaborate than before, layers of white fur adorned with intricate patterns of shells, bones, and what appeared to be scales from some great sea creature. Around her neck hung a crystal vial similar to those used in Rivendell for storing enchanted waters. "You are prepared?" she asked without preamble. "We are," Torian confirmed, rising to meet her, "then follow. And bring only what vessels you have for carrying the sacred water. All else must remain here until your return." They followed her instructions, taking only the crystal containers Elrond had provided for this purpose, 6 vials of flawless crystal, each capable of holding perhaps half a cup of liquid. These they carried carefully wrapped in soft cloth to prevent damage from the cold or accidental impacts. Kaya led them not up the glacier as Torian had expected, but along its base to where a narrow crevasse split the ice wall. This opening, barely wide enough for a person to pass through sideways, descended steeply into darkness beneath the glacier's mass. "The sacred pool lies below," Kaya explained, "in a chamber untouched by sun or moon since the world was young. Only those of my line may ignore a restriction placed by those who entrusted the water to our keeping." Then how Arista began, but Kaya raised a hand to silence him. "You have proven worthy through the night trial," she said to Torian. "You alone may accompany me to the pool. The others must wait here." After brief consultation, they agreed to this arrangement. Torian would go with Kaija, carrying all 6 crystal vials. The others would maintain watch at the crevasse entrance, ready to depart as soon as the water was secured. The descent through the narrow ice passage was treacherous, the walls slick and the footing uncertain. Kaya moved with the confidence of long familiarity, occasionally pointing out handholds or warning of particularly dangerous sections. They descended for what seemed an impossibly long time, the light from the entrance dwindling to a distant pinprick above them. Just as Torian began to wonder how much further they must go, the passage widened suddenly into a chamber of breathtaking beauty. The ice here was not white or blue, but crystal clear, revealing layers of ancient sediment suspended within like illustrations in a book of ages. The chamber's ceiling soared high above, formed in delicate arches that seemed too precise to be natural formations. And at its center, in a depression that might once have been the bed of a hot spring, lay a pool of water unlike any Taurian had seen in his centuries of life. It glowed with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to come from within rather than reflecting from without. Its surface was perfectly still, undisturbed by even the slightest ripple despite their approach. "The water from Ulmo's wells," Kaya said, her voice hushed with reverence, "brought from the undying lands before the world was bent and the straight path hidden. My ancestors have guarded it for 18 generations, using it only in times of greatest need to heal wounds that would not close or to purify lands tainted by unnatural corruption." She approached the pool's edge and knelt, gesturing for Taurian to do the same. "We may take only what your vessels can hold," she cautioned, "and once removed, it cannot be returned to the pool without losing its power. Choose carefully how you use what you carry away from this place." Taurian unwrapped the crystal vials, laying them carefully on a flat section of ice near the pool's edge. Kaya took the first, removed its stopper, and held it poised above the glowing water. "Speak your purpose once more," she instructed, "so that the water knows the task for which it is being called, to strengthen the binding that holds an ancient evil." Taurian said solemnly, "To suppress the influence of relics tied to that binding, preventing creatures of the void from entering our world through the corruption they spread." Kaya nodded approval and dipped the vial into the pool. The water flowed into the crystal container as if eager to be collected, filling it precisely to the brim without spilling a drop. She stoppered it carefully and handed it to Taurian before taking up the second vial. They repeated this process until all 6 vials were filled, each glowing with the same inner light as the pool itself. As Taurian wrapped them once more in protective cloth, he noticed something strange. The level of the pool had not diminished despite the water they had taken. "It replenishes itself," Kaya explained, noting his observation. "Slowly, over centuries. What we have taken will be restored in time, though not within my lifetime or that of my children's children." "Thank you," Taurian said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Your people have maintained a sacred trust longer than most kingdoms have endured. This water may save not just our lands, but yours as well. That is why I give it," Kaya replied simply. "The old stories speak of a time when darkness covered all lands, when the very stars were dimmed by its shadow. If such times threaten to return, all peoples must stand against them, each contributing what they can to the common defense." They ascended from the sacred chamber, the journey upward proving more challenging than the descent had been. By the time they emerged from the crevasse, the short winter day was already fading toward dusk. The others waited anxiously, relief evident in their expressions when Taurian produced the wrapped bundle containing the filled vials. "We have it," he confirmed. "All 6 vials, as Lord Elrond requested." "Then we should depart immediately," Arista urged. "Every day counts if we are to reach Rivendell before the water's power begins to fade. Kaya accompanied them back to the Losath encampment, where they gathered their remaining equipment and prepared for the long journey south. As they made ready to depart, she approached Torion one final time. "The void creature you faced spoke truth about one thing," she said quietly. "Time runs against you. The corruption spreads faster than you can travel, and the darkness in the south grows stronger with each passing day. We will move as swiftly as possible," Torian assured her. "There may be a faster way," Kaya suggested. "Not without risk, but potentially saving weeks of travel." She pointed southward, toward a range of low hills barely visible on the horizon. "Beyond those hills lies a place my people avoid, circle of standing stones, raised by those who dwelled here before even the Losath came to these shores. It is said that one who knows the proper words can use that circle to travel great distances in a single step." "A portal?" Arista asked, overhearing their conversation. "Similar to the paths through Shadowgrove that can shorten weeks of travel to days." "Similar, perhaps, but more dangerous," Kaya confirmed. "The stones respond unpredictably to those not of the blood that raised them. You might arrive precisely where you intended, somewhere else entirely. Given the urgency of our mission, such risk might be warranted," Torian said thoughtfully. "Can you guide us to these stones?" Kaya shook her head firmly. "No Losath will approach that place, but I can provide directions clear enough that you should find it without difficulty. And I can teach you the words that might activate its power passed down through my line, though we ourselves never use them." After brief consultation with the others, Torian accepted her offer. Kaya provided detailed instructions for finding the stone circle, then taught him a series of phrases in a language unlike any he had encountered before, harsh and angular, with sounds that seemed to catch in the throat like ice crystals. "Speak these words only when you stand at the circle's center," she warned, "and focus your thoughts clearly on your destination. The more specific the image in your mind, the more likely you are to arrive where you intend." With final expressions of gratitude, they departed the Losath encampment as the last light faded from the western sky. Their path now turned southeast, toward the hills Kaya had indicated, and the ancient stone circle that might provide a shortcut in their increasingly desperate race against time. Behind them, the glacier gleamed in the light of the rising moon, its massive presence a reminder of the age and endurance of the world they fought to protect. And above, the northern lights began their nightly dance once more, ribbons of color stretching across the sky like bridges between worlds, perhaps warnings of the boundaries that, once crossed, might never be restored. The journey to the stone circle took 2 days, across terrain that grew increasingly strange as they approached the hills Kaya had described. The landscape seemed subtly wrong in ways difficult to articulate, plants that grew in patterns too regular to be natural, rocks balanced in configurations that defied gravity, and occasionally glimpses of animals that moved with unsettling coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. "This land feels watched," Damrod observed as they made camp on the evening of the first day. "Not hostile, exactly, but aware of our presence in a way normal wilderness isn't. The Lotheth avoid this region for good reason, Haleth agreed, scanning the horizon with evident unease. Old power lingers here neither good nor evil by our reckoning, but indifferent to human concerns in ways that make it dangerous nonetheless. Torian had noticed it too, a subtle pressure against his mind, like standing at the edge of a great height and feeling the urge to jump. The pendant at his throat remained warm, its glow steady but subdued, as if conserving strength for greater challenges ahead. They encountered no corrupted creatures or signs of void influence, which Arista suggested might indicate the ancient power of the region actively repelled such intrusions. Like Rivendell or Lothlorien, he explained. Places where older magics maintain boundaries that shadow cannot easily cross. The stone circle became visible late on the second day, a ring of massive monoliths standing atop the highest of the low hills, silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Even from a distance, their unnatural precision was evident. Each stone stood exactly the same height as its neighbors, spaced at perfect intervals around a circumference that seemed to have been measured with mathematical exactitude. Not dwarven work, Lindor observed as they approached, nor elven, nor of men as we know them. These stones were raised by hands belonging to none of the peoples who now inhabit Tirana. The Lost speak of those who dwelt here before, Haleth recalled, beings neither fully of this world nor fully separate from it. The stories say they departed westward when the sun first rose, finding its light painful after eons of starlight and shadow. They reached the circle as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Up close, the monoliths were even more impressive each, standing 3 times the height of a man, composed of a black stone veined with silver that caught the fading light like trapped lightning. Symbols had been carved into their surfaces, similar to those around the entrance to the ice cave, but more complex, more complete. A language I do not recognize, Arista said, studying the nearest stone with scholarly interest. Though certain elements resemble the oldest forms of Quenya, suggesting a common ancestral tongue predating the separation of elves and men. The circle's interior was paved with the same black stone as the monoliths, fitted together so precisely that the seams were nearly invisible. At its center stood a raised platform, circular and perhaps 10 feet in diameter. Its surface inscribed with a pattern of interlocking spirals that seemed to shift and move when viewed from the corner of the eye. This is where the activation must occur, Torian surmised, approaching the platform cautiously, where I must speak the words Kaya taught me. We should prepare carefully, Arista advised. If this truly functions as a portal, we need to be ready for immediate travel, and for the possibility that we might arrive somewhere unexpected. They spent the remaining daylight organizing their equipment, ensuring everything essential was secured and nothing would be lost in transit. The crystal vials containing the water from Olmo's wells were distributed among them too, each to Torian, Arista, and Lindirto. Minimize the risk of losing all should one person become separated during the portal's activation. As twilight deepened around them, a change came over the stone circle. The silver veins in the monoliths began to glow faintly. responding to the fading light in ways that suggested awareness rather than mere physical properties. The spiral pattern on the central platform grew more distinct, its apparent movement more pronounced. "It awakens with the stars," Linda observed, his sensitivity to magical energies allowing him to perceive what the others felt only as vague impressions. "The portal's power strengthens as daylight wanes." "Then we should act now," Torian decided, "before full night falls and its power might become too strong for us to control." They gathered on the central platform, standing close together with their packs and weapons secured. Torian took a position at the exact center, where the spiral pattern converged in a complex knot that seemed to pulse beneath his feet. "Focus on Rivendell," he instructed the others. "On the valley, the waterfalls, the last homely house. The more clearly we all envision the same destination, the more likely we are to arrive there together." When he was certain they were ready, Torian began to recite the words Kaya had taught him, angular phrases in that ancient tongue, each syllable feeling like ice crystals forming on his tongue. The pendant at his throat grew warmer with each word, its glow intensifying until it illuminated the entire platform. The spiral pattern beneath their feet responded, its movement accelerating. Lines of silver light tracing the carved channels until the entire design blazed with cold fire. The monoliths around the circle's perimeter joined the awakening, their silver veins pulsing in rhythm with Torian's words. As he spoke the final phrase, the world seemed to fold around them, not violently, but with the inexorable precision of a master craftsman creasing parchment. The stone circle, the hills, the northern sky, all compressed into a single point of brilliant light, then expanded again into something entirely different. They stood in a forest clearing, surrounded by tall pines swaying in a gentle breeze that carried the scent of approaching rain. The stone circle was gone, replaced by soft earth covered in pine needles, and the sky above showed stars in configurations that suggested they had indeed traveled far to the south. "Did it work?" Damrod asked, his voice hushed with awe at what they had just experienced. "Are we near Rivendell?" Torian oriented himself by the stars, identifying constellations he recognized. "We're certainly much further south," he confirmed, "but I don't recognize this specific location." Haleth moved to the edge of the clearing, examining the surrounding forest with a ranger's practiced eye. "These are not the woods around Rivendell," he reported. "The trees are wrong northern pines rather than the mixed forests of Imladris." "We should find higher ground," Arista suggested. "Get our bearings before proceeding further." They moved cautiously through the unfamiliar forest, alert for any sign of danger or indication of their location. The terrain sloped gradually upward, suggesting they were on the lower flanks of a mountain or large hill. After perhaps an hour's careful progress, they emerged from the tree line onto a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the surrounding landscape. What they saw confirmed they had indeed missed their intended destination. Below them stretched a vast forest, silver-black in the moonlight, extending to the horizon in most directions. To the east, barely visible in the distance, rose the dark silhouette of a mountain range, and to the north, A great shadow blotted out the stars-net clouds, but something more solid, more ominous. Shadow Grove, Torian realized with a mixture of surprise and concern. We've arrived at its southern edge. Those are the mountains of Shadow Grove to the east, and that darkness to the north. He hesitated, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the night air. That's Dol Guldur. The name hung heavy in the air between them. Dol Guldur Hill of sorcery, stronghold of the necromancer who had corrupted Greenwood, the great into Shadow Grove, the dark, a place of ancient evil, abandoned for centuries, but never truly cleansed. How could the portal have sent us here? Arista wondered aloud. Our thoughts were focused on Rivendell, not this place of shadow. Unless something interfered with the portal's function, Lindor suggested. Something that wanted us brought here specifically. The implications were troubling. If some force had deliberately redirected their journey, it suggested an intelligence working against Themp, perhaps the same entities from the void that sought to prevent the ritual of containment. We should move away from here, Halef urged, his hand resting on his sword hilt as he scanned the darkness below. Dol Guldur may be abandoned, but evil things still dwell in its shadow. Agreed, Torian said. But first, we need to determine our best route. Rivendell lies far to the west from here, beyond the Misty Mountains. But my own realm, the Woodland Realm, lies north through Shadow Grove itself, where the dagger is kept, Arista noted, one of the relics we seek to contain. The realization brought clarity to their situation. That's why we were brought here, Torian said. Not random chance or portal malfunction, but deliberate interference. Something wants us near the dagger perhaps, to prevent us from completing the ritual. Or perhaps for some purpose we don't yet understand. Either way, we face a choice, Lindor observed. Continue west toward Rivendell as planned, or investigate this apparent manipulation by traveling north to the Woodland Realm. After brief deliberation, they decided to split their company. Torian, Arista, and Linda would journey north through Shadow Grove to the Elven King's halls, carrying 4 of the 6 vials of water from Olmo's wells. Haleth and Damrod would travel west toward Rivendell with the remaining 2 vials, warning Lord Elrond of what had occurred and preparing for the next stage of their quest. The Rangers know the lands between here and Rivendell, well, Haleth assured them. We can make good time across the plains of Anduin and through the high passes of the Misty Mountains. And we know the paths through Shadow Grove, Torian replied. Even those corrupted by Shadow. We'll investigate the dagger's containment, ensure it remains secure, and join you in Rivendell as soon as possible. They shared what supplies could be spared, ensuring both groups had sufficient provisions for their respective journeys. The Rangers would travel light and fast, while the elves would move more cautiously through the dangerous forest. 20 days until the water loses its power, Arista reminded them as they prepared to part ways. We must all reach Rivendell well before then if the ritual is to proceed as planned. We'll be there, Haleth promised. Look for us in 2 weeks' time, no more. With final words of caution and farewell, the Rangers departed, heading west toward the distant line of the Misty Mountains. Torian watched until they disappeared into the darkness, then turned his attention to the forest that stretched before them his home. Once called Greenwood the Great, now darkened to Shadow Grove by the shadow that had taken root at Dol Guldur. "We should rest until dawn," he suggested. "Shadow Grove is dangerous enough by day. By night, it becomes deadly to all but those who serve the darkness." They made camp on the rocky outcropping, taking turns at watch through the remaining hours of darkness. Torian's thoughts turned repeatedly to the dagger secured in its vault beneath his king's halls. Had its containment been compromised? Was that why they had been drawn here instead of Rivendell? Or was there some other purpose behind their unexpected arrival? Dawn brought little warmth, but much needed light as they began their journey into Shadowgrove's depths. The forest had changed since Torian had last walked its southern richesti trees, grown more twisted, the undergrowth more tangled, the very air heavier with malice. Spiders' webs stretched between trunks, some large enough to ensnare deer or even men, though they encountered none of the massive arachnids that had spun them. "The corruption spreads even here," Lindor observed, his sensitivity to such things making him particularly aware of the forest's condition. Not from the relics directly, but from Dol Guldur itself. "The darkness in the south that the Watcher warned us, Abuti, reaches outward, changing everything it touches," Sauron Eristor said quietly. "If he truly stirs again, this would be where his influence first manifests." Dol Guldur was his stronghold before he revealed himself and returned to Mordor. They followed the elf path, a narrow track that wound through the forest, protected by ancient enchantments that kept the worst of the corruption at bay. Even so, they moved cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. Shadowgrove had earned its name through the deaths of countless travelers who had underestimated its hazards. On the third day of their journey through the forest, they encountered their first direct evidence that something was indeed wrong at the heart of the woodland realm. A patrol of elven warriors moving south along the path, not the usual border guards, but elite fighters from Elrond's personal guard, armed for serious combat rather than routine surveillance. Their leader, a stern-faced elf named Furhan, whom Torian knew well, greeted them with surprise that quickly turned to relief. "Torian, your return is most timely. The king has ordered search parties to locate you specifically." "What has happened?" Torian asked, concern sharpening his voice. "The vault has been breached," Furhan replied grimly. "The dagger you brought from the western ruins sits gone." The news hit Torian like a physical blow. Impossible. The vault was secured with the strongest enchantments, guarded day and night. "The guards were found dead," Fern continued, his expression darkening further. "Not killed by blade or arrow, but changed. Corrupted from within, like the scouts you encountered before your departure." "When did this happen?" Eristor asked. 3 nights past." The king felt the wards break a magical backlash that shook the entire cavern system. By the time reinforcements reached the vault, the dagger was gone, and the guards, he shook his head, unwilling to describe what they had found in detail. "And the thief," Torian pressed. "Was there any sign of war? What might have taken it?" "Nothing definitive," Fern admitted. "But the king's seers, detected a presence. They could not identify something, neither elf nor man, nor any creature known to us. It left traces of void magic, similar to what you reported from the western ruins. The implications were clear and deeply troubling. A void entity had somehow penetrated the woodland realm's defenses, overcome the vault's enchantments, and stolen one of the relics they sought to contain. The timing coinciding almost exactly with their unexpected arrival near Dol. Golda suggested a coordinated effort rather than opportunistic theft. We must return to the king's halls immediately, Torian decided. The water from Ulmo's wells might help track the dagger's new location, and the king needs to know what we've learned about the relic's growing influence. Fern provided them with fresh horses from the patrol's remounts, allowing them to travel much faster than they could have on foot. They rode north along the elf path, the forest growing less oppressive as they approached the woodland realm's heart, where elven magic still maintained some semblance of the forest's original beauty. They reached the forest river on the 6th day, following its course to where it flowed past the great hill beneath which Ileron had established his underground kingdom. The massive doors stood open as they approached, flanked by guards whose normally impassive expressions showed signs of strain and wariness. Inside, the cavern system that served as the woodland realm's capital showed subtle but unmistakable signs of recent disturbance. Additional guards stood at every junction. Enchanted lanterns burned more brightly than usual, and the elves they passed moved with the alert tension of those expecting attack at any moment. King Eleron received them immediately in his private council chamber, rather than the more formal throne room. The Elven King's ageless face showed rare signs of concern, his normally perfect composure disturbed by recent events. Torian, he greeted, rising from his seat at the council table. Your return is well timed, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I've heard about the dagger, Torian replied, bowing respectfully. Fern told us it was stolen 3 nights ago. Stolen, yes, though that hardly conveys the nature of what occurred. Ileron gestured for them to be seated, then continued with uncharacteristic directness. Something entered my kingdom uninvited and undetected. It bypassed wards that have kept out the darkest creatures of Dol Guldur for centuries. It killed 4 of my best guards without raising an alarm, and it took the dagger without triggering the vault's defensive enchantments until it was already escaping. A void entity, Torian suggested, like those we encountered at the western ruins. So our seers believe, Eleron confirmed, but more powerful than any you described from your previous encounters. This was no mere echo or manifestation. This was something with purpose, intelligence, and power beyond what we anticipated. Torian exchanged glances with Arista and Lindor. We've learned much since I departed, he said, turning back to the king. The relic's influence grows stronger, creating connections across vast distances, and entities from the void find ways into our world through the corruption these connections generate. He explained their journey to Rivendell, the scrying crystal's revelations about the spreading tendrils of influence, and their subsequent quest to find components for a ritual of containment. When he mentioned the Watcher and the ritual components they sought, Elrond's expression grew thoughtful. This watcher, Wendell, as he once called himself, I remember him from the early days of our settlement here. He visited occasionally, speaking with my father about matters they shared with no others. The king's gaze grew distant with memory. He warned of darkness that might one day return, of preparations that should be made against that eventuality. We thought he spoke of Sauron, but perhaps he foresaw this threat from beyond the void as well. The two may be connected, Arista suggested. The Watcher implied that Sauron seeks alliance with these void entities, offering them passage into our world in exchange for power to hasten his own return. A disturbing possibility, Elrond acknowledged, and one that aligns with other reports we've received. Our patrols have noted increased activity around Dol Guldur in recent months. Not orcs or other conventional servants of darkness, but something else. Creatures that move like shadows given partial substance, that leave corruption in their wake. Voidwalkers, Torian said grimly, similar to those we fought at the binding ritual, but able to manifest more fully as the connections between relics strengthen. The conversation turned to practical matter. Shot could be done to track the stolen dagger, how to protect the remaining relics, and whether the ritual of containment could still succeed with one relic now in unknown hands. The water from Olmo's wells might help locate the dagger, Arista suggested. It contains properties that naturally oppose void magic. A small amount, properly prepared, could create a scrying medium specifically attuned to the dagger's resonance. Worth attempting, Elrond agreed, though we must be cautious. If this void entity was powerful enough to penetrate our defenses once, it might detect and respond to magical attempts to locate it. They decided to proceed with the scrying attempt, but to prepare for immediate action based on its results. If the dagger could be located, a force of elven warriors would be dispatched to recover Etor, at least to confirm its new location and the nature of whatever now possessed it. Lindor, with his experience as guardian of the frame, would oversee the scrying ritual. One of the crystal vials was carefully opened. A small portion of its precious contents poured into a silver basin, specially prepared with enchantments of finding and revealing. The ritual took place in Elrond's private sanctuary, chamber deep within the cavern system, where the king practiced his own considerable magical abilities away from observing eyes. Only Torian, Arista, and the king himself were present as Linda began the delicate work of attuning the scrying medium to the dagger's unique magical signature. I need something connected to the dagger, Linda explained. Something that was in contact with it during or after the binding ritual. Torian removed a small pouch from his pack and he had carried since their return from the western ruins. The cloth I used to wrap it after the ritual, he said, placing it beside the silver basin. It should retain traces of the dagger's essence. Lindor nodded approval and began to chant softly in ancient Quenya, passing his hands over the basin in complex patterns that left trails of silver light in the air. The water from Olmo's wells responded, its glow intensifying and shifting through various hues as it attuned to the residual energy in the cloth. The ritual continued for nearly an hour, the chanting growing more complex, the patterns of light more intricate. Finally, The water in the basin stabilized on a deep blue radiance that illuminated the chamber with cold, clear light. "It's ready," Lindor announced, his voice slightly strained from the extended working. "Now we must focus our thoughts on the dagger itself, its appearance, its energy, the last location where we knew it to be." They gathered around the basin, each concentrating as Lindor had instructed. The water's surface rippled slightly, then stilled into a mirror-like perfection that no longer reflected the chamber around it. Instead, it showed darkness, not the absence of light, but an active, swirling darkness that seemed to absorb the basin's radiance. Gradually, details emerged within that darkness. Stone walls, ancient and crumbling, twisted metal fixtures that might once have been torches or braziers, a floor paved with black stone veined with some dark metal, and at the center of this space, mounted on a pedestal of bone and sinew that pulsed with unnatural life, the dagger, its runes glowing with sickly green fire, much brighter than when Torian had last seen it. "I know this place," Eleron said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The throne room of Dol Guldur, where the necromancer once sat and corrupted my realm with his foul presence. The dagger has been taken to the heart of Sauron's old stronghold," Arista observed, confirming the connection between the void entities and the darkness in the south. The image in the basin shifted, pulling back to show more of the throne room. Figures moved at its edge-tail, emaciated forms in ancient armor, their features obscured by shadow. Void walkers, but more substantial than those Torian had encountered before, more fully manifested in the physical world, and seated upon the throne itself, a figure that caused all who observed it to recoil instinctively. Not fully corporeal, but not merely shadow, ethera, being caught between states of existence. Its form constantly shifting between humanoid and something utterly alien, where a face should have been only darkness swirled, occasionally parting to reveal glimpses of a landscape beyond their void itself, visible through this entity as if through a window into another reality. "The thief," Torian whispered, "the void entity that stole the dagger." "More than that," Lindor corrected, his sensitivity to such energies allowing him to perceive what the others could not. "This is no mere servant or manifestation. This is something older, more powerful. A lord among its kind, perhaps." As if hearing Lindia's assessment across the magical connection, the void entity on the throne turned its attention directly toward the scrying basin, the darkness where its face should have been parted further, revealing a maw of swirling void stuff that seemed to reach through the magical link toward them. "It sees us," Illaron warned, already moving to disrupt the scrying ritual. "End this, now." Lindor attempted to sever the connection, but the void entity had already established a countergrip on the magic, using the scrying link as an anchor to reach across the distance between Dol Guldur and the Elven King's halls. The water in the basin began to boil, not with heat but with corruption darkness, spreading through the sacred liquid like ink through clear water. The vile Arista shouted, grabbing the crystal container that had held the now corrupting water. "Seal it before the contamination spreads." Torian moved swiftly. appending the basin onto the stone floor where the corrupted water hissed and evaporated into foul-smelling smoke. The magical connection broke with an almost audible snap, the void entity's reaching presence cut off from their sanctum. But the damage had been done. The water from almost Welsett, at least the portion they had used for scrying, was lost, corrupted beyond recovery. And worse, the void entity now knew they were searching for it, knew they possessed the means to potentially track its movements. "It will be expecting us now," Eleran said grimly as they recovered from the backlash of the severed connection. "Any attempt to recover the dagger will face prepared defenses." "We may not need to recover it immediately," Arista suggested, his scholarly mind already analyzing alternatives. "The ritual of containment doesn't require the relics themselves to be presentingly components that can suppress their influence across distances. But with the dagger now actively empowered at Dol Guldur, its corruption will spread faster," Torian pointed out. "The connections between relics will strengthen more quickly." "Then we must accelerate our own plans," Ileron decided. "You said the Rangers traveled to Rivendell with 2 vials of the water. Good. You 3 will follow with the remaining 3 intact vials. I will send a force to Dol Guldur to recover the dagger directly, but to disrupt whatever workings the void entity has established around it. A diversion," Torian realized, "to slow the corruption spread while we complete the ritual preparations." "Precisely," the king confirmed. "My warriors cannot defeat this entity directly. That much is clear from how easily it penetrated our defenses. But they can harass its servants, destroy its outer workings, force it to focus on defense rather than extending its influence." The plan was quickly refined. Ileran would lead the diversionary force, himself as power as one of the eldest, elves remaining in Tirana, making him the most effective counter to the void entity's magic. Meanwhile, Torian, Arista, and Lindor would depart immediately for Rivendell, taking the most direct route through Shadowgrove and over the Misty Mountains. "The High Pass will be treacherous this time of year," Eleron warned. "But it remains the swiftest route to Imladris. I will provide guides to lead you to the forest edge and fresh supplies for the mountain crossing." As they prepared for departure, Torian found himself drawn to the balcony overlooking the forest river, his thoughts troubled by what they had witnessed in the scrying basin. The void entity had established itself at the heart of Sauron's old stronghold, wielding the dagger's power to accelerate the corruption's spread. And it had sensed their scrying, reached back through the magical connection with disturbing ease. They faced an enemy more formidable than they had anticipated, that understood their plans and actively worked to counter them. The race to complete the ritual of containment had become even more urgent, the consequences of failure even more dire. Arista joined him on the balcony, his own expression reflecting similar concerns. "The entity we saw," he said quietly. "It was unlike the void walkers or corrupted creatures we've encountered before. More fundamental, as if it were a piece of the void itself, given partial form in our reality." "The void is not empty," Torian quoted Arathan's warning. "Things wait there, things that will find another way in if Morathiel is gone." "And now they have," Arista concluded grimly. using the Relics' influence as their pathway, the corruption as their beachhead, which makes our mission all the more critical, Torian replied, his resolve hardening. We must secure the remaining components, complete the ritual of containment, not just to suppress the Relic's influence now, but to close the pathways these entities are using to enter our world. They departed the woodland realm at dawn the following day, traveling light and fast with the guides Elrond had provided. Behind them, the Elven King prepared his diversionary Fursalite warriors, equipped with enchanted weapons, similar to those that had proven effective against void creatures in the past. The journey through Shadowgrove was swift, the guides leading them along secret paths known only to the woodland elves. They emerged from the forest's western edge 5 days after leaving the king's halls, the misty mountains rising before them like a great wall separating them from their destination. The guides departed there, returning to join Elrond's force, while Torian, Arista, and Lindor continued westward toward the high pass. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the mountains, forcing them to abandon their horses at a small settlement of woodsmen who traded with both elves and the men of the Anduin Vale. On foot, they began the ascent into the misty mountains, following a trail that wound between towering peaks still capped with snow despite the season. The high pass lived up to Alarin's warning treacherous, with loose stone and occasional ice patches, exposed to bitter winds that cut through even elven cloaks with knife-like precision. They encountered no other travelers, the pass being largely abandoned as winter approached, but signs of recent passage were evident to Torian's experienced eye boot prints too large for men. Crude markings scratched into stone at junctions, and occasionally the remains of fires built with little concern for concealment. Goblins, he warned his companions as they made camp in a sheltered hollow on the 3rd night of their mountain crossing. They've been through here recently, in numbers. Unusual for them to be so active before the deep snows, Arista observed. Typically, they remain in their tunnels until winter forces travelers to seek shelter in caves, making easier prey. Unless something has driven them out, Lindor suggested, or someone has directed them to patrol the pass more aggressively. The implication was clear if the void entity at Dol Guldur knew of their mission. It might be actively working to block their path to Rivendell. Goblins, while not directly connected to the void creatures, were opportunistic servants of any power that promised violence and plunder. They proceeded with increased caution, traveling by night when possible to avoid silhouetting themselves against the sky for watching eyes. The pass narrowed as they approached its highest point, the trail becoming little more than a ledge along a sheer cliff face with a dizzying drop to one side. It was here, at the most vulnerable point of their journey, that the attack came. Goblins appeared above and below the trail, having used hidden handholds in the cliff face to position themselves for ambush. They were numerous, at least 20, that Torian could count in the brief moment before combat was joined, armed with crude but effective weapons. What made this goblin band truly dangerous, however, was immediately apparent. Their eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and black veins were visible beneath their already mottled skin. They had been touched by the same corruption that had claimed the scouts in Shadow Grove and the guards at the Vaultnut, fully transformed, but influenced enough to make them more coordinated, more purposeful than typical goblins. Corrupted, Torian warned, drawing his sword as the first attackers scrambled onto the trail. They're being controlled. The narrow trail became both liability and advantage-elating. How many goblins could attack at once, but also restricting the elves' movement and fighting options. They formed a defensive triangle, protecting the packs containing the precious vials of water from Olmos wells. The corrupted goblins fought with uncharacteristic discipline, sacrificing themselves without hesitation to wear down the elves' defenses. Where one fell, two more scrambled to take its place, heedless of the deadly drop beside the trail. "We can't maintain this position," Arista called over the clash of weapons. "They'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers." Torian saw the truth in this assessment. Already, more goblins were appearing along the cliff face, summoned perhaps by some signal from the first attackers. They needed to break through to reach a more defensible position beyond the narrowest section of trail. "On my mark," he ordered. We charge forward, cutting through their line. "Don't stop for anything, just keep moving until we reach wider ground." At his signal, they surged forward as one, catching the goblins by surprise with their sudden aggression. Torian led the charge, his ancient sword cleaving through the first opponent with elven precision. Arista and Lindor followed close behind, their own blades finding marks with deadly efficiency. For a moment, it seemed their gambit would succeed. The goblin line broke before their onslaught, creatures falling from the trail or scrambling back in disarray. But then something new entered the friar figure, larger than the goblins, moving with a fluid grace that belied its size. A void walker, fully manifested in physical form, its armor gleaming dully in the mountain twilight. It carried a weapon of black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect ether. Curved blade that trailed wisps of darkness as it moved through the air. "Keep moving," Torian shouted, recognizing they couldn't afford to engage this more dangerous opponent in such precarious terrain. Reached the wider section ahead. They redoubled their efforts, cutting through the remaining goblins with desperate speed. The Void Walker pursued, moving with that unnatural quickness Torian remembered from the binding ritual. It made no sound as it closed the distance, but the very air seemed to grow colder with its approach. They reached the wider section of trail just as the Void Walker caught up to them. Here, the path broadened into a small plateau, where travelers typically rested before the final descent toward the western foothills. It offered room to maneuver, but also exposed them to attack from multiple directions as more corrupted goblins converged on their position. "Form a circle," Torian ordered. "Protect the packs at all costs." They stood back to back as enemies surrounded them, goblins to all sides, and the Void Walker approaching with measured steps, as if confident in their eventual defeat. The pendant at Torian's throat glowed brightly now, responding to the void creature's proximity, but he doubted its power alone would be sufficient against both the walker and its goblin thralls. As the circle of enemies tightened around them, Lindor spoke urgently. the water could use a small amount as a weapon. It harmed the corruption in the scrying basin. It might affect these creatures similarly. That water is meant for the ritual, Arista objected. We can't waste it on combat. We won't complete any ritual if we die here, Torian countered. He made a swift decision. One vial. We use one vial if necessary. Preserve the others at all costs. He reached carefully into his pack, extracting one of the crystal containers. Its contents glowed with that same inner light they had witnessed in the sacred pool beneath the glacier power from the undying lands, untouched by corruption or darkness. The Void Walker seemed to recognize the threat. It raised its dark blade and uttered a command in a language that hurt the mind to hear. The corrupted goblins surged forward in response, a coordinated wave of twisted bodies and crude weapons. Torian uncorked the vial as his companions fought to hold back the initial assault. The water within seemed to respond to his intent, its glow intensifying as he raised it above his head. For Arathon, he said quietly. For the binding, he flung the contents outward in a wide arc, the sacred water dispersing into droplets that hung in the air longer than natural physics should allow. Where these droplets touched corrupted goblins, the creatures screamed in agony. Black veins beneath their skin, withering and collapsing as the water's purifying power burned away the influence controlling them. The Void Walker received the brunt of the dispersal, the sacred water striking its armored form like liquid lightning. Unlike the goblins, it made no sound, but its reaction was far more violent. Its physical form began to unravel where the water touched it, armor crumbling to reveal the void stuff beneath not flesh or bone, but a swirling darkness that seemed to connect to somewhere else, somewhere beyond normal perception. The creature staggered backward, its form destabilizing further with each passing second. The black blade fell from its grasp, dissolving into wisps of shadow before it hit the ground. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric, the Void Walker collapsed entirely, not dying in any conventional sense, but being forcibly expelled from the physical world, its connection to reality severed by the water's purifying power. The effect on the corrupted goblins was equally dramatic. Without the Void Walker's controlling presence, they fell into confusion, some fleeing in terror while others collapsed where they stood, the corruption burning out of their systems in painful convulsions. Within moments, the plateau was clear of immediate threats. Torian corked the Naumti vial, returning it to his pack with a mixture of regret and satisfaction. The water had served its purpose, saving their lives, and their mission, but 1/6 of their precious resource was now expended, potentially complicating the ritual of containment. We should move quickly, Arista urged as they caught their breath. That Void Walker's destruction will be felt by whatever controls these creatures. They'll send more. Agreed, Torian replied. The western descent is less treacherous than what we've already traversed. If we maintain a steady pace, we can reach the foothills by dawn. They set out immediately, leaving the plateau and its scattered evidence of battle behind. The trail indeed became easier as they began the descent toward the western slopes of the Misty Mountains. By first light, they had left the highest peaks behind, the terrain gradually softening from bare rock to alpine meadows dotted with hardy shrubs and occasional stands of wind-twisted pines. They paused briefly at midday, taking shelter in a small grove to rest and assess their situation. The remaining 3 vials of water from Almost Wells were intact, their glow steady and strong within their crystal containers. But the encounter at the high pass had demonstrated a troubling escalation in their enemy's tactics. The void entity at Dol Guldur must have significant power to project its influence this far, Arister observed, corrupting goblins and manifesting a void walker hundreds of leagues from its physical location. Or it has allies we haven't identified, Lindor suggested. Other entities that have found their way through the weakening barriers between worlds. Either possibility is concerning, Torian acknowledged, but it also confirms we're on the right path. They wouldn't commit such resources to stopping us if the ritual we seek to perform didn't pose a genuine threat to their plans. They continued their journey with renewed determination, descending further into the foothills where forests began to reclaim the landscape. The weather improved as they left the mountain's influence, autumn sunshine warming their path, as they traveled the increasingly well-defined road that would eventually lead them to Rivendell. On the 2nd day after the battle at the High Pass, they encountered a patrol of elven riders from Imladra scouts, sent by Lord Elrond after the rangers had arrived with their warning and the 2 vials of water they had carried from the north. "We've been searching for you," the patrol leader explained after greetings were exchanged. "The rangers arrived 5 days ago, reporting your company had been separated and that you 3 would be coming through the mountains. Has there been any word from the Woodland Realm?" Torian asked. King Eleron planned a diversionary attack on Dol Guldur to disrupt the void entity that has taken the dagger. "No direct communication," the patrol leader replied. "But our watchers have reported increased activity in the mountains east of Harrow movements of creatures that serve the darkness, as if responding to some disturbance or threat elsewhere." "Eleron's diversion is working," Arister concluded, drawing attention and resources away from whatever the void entity had planned. With the patrol as escort, they made swift progress toward Rivendell, reaching the ford of Bruinen by nightfall. The river's enchanted waters offered additional protection, Lord Elrond's power extending to this natural boundary of his realm. They crossed at dawn, the rising sun casting long shadows behind them as they entered the valley of Imladris. Rivendell appeared unchanged since, their departure a haven of peace and beauty, seemingly untouched by the growing darkness beyond its borders. But appearances could be deceiving. As they approached the last homely house, Torian noted subtle signs of increased vigilance, more sentries at key points. Enchantments renewed and strengthened around the valley's perimeter, and an atmosphere of quiet preparation rather than the usual tranquil contemplation. Lord Elrond greeted them personally, his ageless face showing relief at their safe return. The rangers arrived with their portion of the water, he confirmed after initial welcomes were exchanged. "And with troubling news of your unexpected arrival near Dol Guldur, rather than here as intended." "Deliberate interference," Torian explained, "and now we know why. The dagger has been stolen from the Woodland Realm, taken to Dol Guldur by a powerful void entity that seems to be coordinating the corruption's spread. Elrond's expression grew grave as they related the full Talit scrying attempt. The void entity they had glimpsed on Sauron's old throne, the corrupted goblins and Voidwalker at the High Pass. When they mentioned using one vial of the sacred water as a weapon, he nodded understanding rather than showing disappointment at the loss. "You made the correct choice," he assured them. "The water's power against these void entities confirms it is indeed a crucial component for the ritual of containment, and 5 vials should still be sufficient if we are precise in our measurements and preparations." They moved to Elrond's private study, where maps and ancient texts had been arranged in preparation for planning the next stage of their quest. The rangers, Haleth and Damrod, joined them there, looking weary but determined after their own journey from the south. The second component, Elrond reminded them, indicating a map of the western seas. Earth from the foundations of Angband, now forming an island far to the west, beyond the sight of all but the keenest eyes, according to the Watcher. "I believe I know the place he described," Arista said, studying the map carefully. "There are accounts in our oldest records of an island that appeared after the breaking of Thangorodrima, fragment of Morgoth's fortress thrust upward when the land was remade. Our mariners called it Tolfuin, the Isle of Night, for the darkness that seemed to cling to it even under the brightest sun." "How far?" Torian asked, noting the island's position far out in the western sea. "A journey of at least 3 weeks by ship from the nearest harbor," Arista replied grimly. "And that assumes favorable winds and weather." "Too long," Lindor observed. "The water from Ulmo's wells will lose its power before a conventional voyage could be completed. Then we need an unconventional method of travel," Elrond decided. "Something faster than any ship, capable of reaching the island and returning within the time remaining to us." "The Great Eagles," Haleth suggested. "They aided the Free Peoples during the wars against Morgoth and Sauron. Might they not help in this cause as well?" Perhaps Elrond allowed. "Though they answer to no one save themselves, and rarely involve themselves in the affairs of those who walk the earth rather than soar above it." He turned to Torian. "The pendant the Watcher gave you said it could be used to call him when needed. Perhaps he could advise us on reaching this island swiftly." Torian touched the pendant at his throat, which had remained warm since their encounter with the Voidwalker in the mountains. He said to use it when we had secured each component. "We have the water, but not yet the earth or flame." "Circumstances have changed," Arista pointed out. "With the dagger now in enemy hands and void entities actively working against us, we may need his counsel sooner than anticipated." After brief deliberation, they agreed to attempt contact with the Watcher. Unlike the elaborate ritual they had performed in the glade above Rivendell, this would be a more direct calling, using the pendant's connection to its maker. They moved to a secluded terrace overlooking the valley, where the sound of waterfalls provided a constant background that would mask their working from distant observation. Torian removed the pendant from around his neck, holding it in his palm as the others formed a circle around him. "Focus your thoughts on the Watcher," Elrond instructed. on the crossroads where you encountered him, on his appearance and manner. I will provide the power to extend your call beyond the boundaries of our world." Torian closed his eyes, concentrating as directed. He pictured the Watcher's ageless face, the robes of shifting color, the voice that had seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his mind. He remembered the crossroads, that impossible chamber where paths converged across distances, both physical and metaphysical. The pendant grew warmer in his hand, its glow intensifying until it was visible even through his closed eyelids. Elrond began to chant softly in ancient Quenya, words of calling and opening that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. Unlike the previous ritual, this calling produced no visible disturbance in the air, no golden light or thinning of boundaries. Instead, the Watcher simply appeared, standing at the edge of the terrace as if he had been there all along, merely unnoticed until now. "You call earlier than expected," he observed, his voice carrying that same quality of bypassing physical hearing. "The water has been secured, but not the earth or flame. Circumstances have changed," Torian explained, replacing the pendant around his neck. "The dagger has been taken by a void entity of considerable power. It has established itself at Dol Guldur, accelerating the corruptions, spread and actively working to prevent our completion of the ritual." The Watcher's expression grew troubled. "I feared this might occur. The binding's weakness creates opportunities for entities beyond the void to extend their influence into your world. Some are merely echoes or manifestations, but others," he shook his head slightly, "others are more fundamental, more dangerous. Beings that existed before the shaping of Arda, that remember the void as it was before Iru's creation brought light and order." "Can the ritual still succeed?" Elrond asked directly, with one relic now in enemy hands. "Yes," the Watcher confirmed. "The ritual of containment works by suppressing the relic's influence, regardless of their physical location. But it becomes more difficult, requiring more precise execution and greater power to overcome the active resistance you will now face." "We face another challenge as well," Arista added. "The second component from the foundations of Angband lies on an island far out in the Western Sea. Even with the swiftest ship, we cannot reach it and return before the water from Olmos Wells loses its power." The Watcher considered this problem, his gaze turning westward as if he could see across the vast distance to the island they sought. "There may be a way," he said finally, "not without risk, but potentially faster than conventional travel." He turned back to them, decision evident in his posture. "I cannot transport you. Directly, my ability to move others between locations is limited by ancient restrictions placed upon my kind. But I can create a temporary pathway similar to the one you used beneath the mountains of Golden Passage that will lead you to the shores of Tall Fuin. Similar to how we traveled from the crossroads to the edge of the corrupted lands," Torian recalled. "Yes, though over a much greater distance, which introduces additional complications," the Watcher cautioned. "The passage will be less stable, more susceptible to interference, and I can maintain it only briefly perhaps, long enough for 3 travelers to pass through, no more. 3 of us will go, Torian decided immediately. Myself, Arista, for his knowledge of ancient lore, and he hesitated, considering who would best complete their small company. I will go, Haleth volunteered. Rangers are accustomed to traveling light and adapting to unexpected circumstances, and having a mortal man in your company may prove useful if you encounter others of my kind. The Watcher nodded approval of this selection. Prepare quickly, he advised. Bring only what is essential: weapons, provisions for 3 days, and containers for the earth you seek. I will create the passage at sunset, when the boundaries between worlds naturally thin. What will we face on this island? Arista asked. What dangers should we prepare for? Tall Fuin retains echoes of Morgoth's power, the Watcher replied. The very ground remembers the evil that once dwelled there. Expect distortions of natural law, creatures warped by lingering corruption, and a heaviness of spirit that will test your resolve. And the earth itself, Torian pressed. How will we recognize what we seek? You will know it by its resonance with the water from Olmo's wells, the Watcher explained. Bring a small amount with you, where it reacts most strongly. There you will find earth that contains the power of Morgoth's binding. Black soil veined with a metal that resembles iron but is nother, colder, with a luster that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. With these instructions, they set about preparing for the journey to Torfuin. Elrond provided specialized equipment like packs, weapons enchanted against creatures of darkness, and crystal containers specifically designed for transporting magically active substances. As sunset approached, they gathered on the same terrace where they had called the Watcher. He stood at its edge, looking westward as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The pendant at Torian's throat glowed with increasing brightness as the light faded, responding to the Watcher's gathering power. Remember, the enigmatic being cautioned as they made final adjustments to their equipment. The passage will lead you to Torfuin's eastern shore. From there, you must find the earth you seek and return to the same location within 3 days. I will reopen the passage at sunset on the 3rd day. Be there, or you will find yourselves with a much longer journey home. We understand, Torian assured him. 3 days to find the earth and return to the arrival point. One more warning, the Watcher added, his expression grave. The void entity that has taken the dagger may sense this working. It has already demonstrated the ability to detect and interfere with magical operations at a distance. Be prepared for resistance, both here and at your destination. With those ominous words hanging in the air, he turned fully toward the setting sun and raised his hands in a complex gesture. The air before him rippled, then parted like a curtain drawn aside, revealing a tunnel of golden light similar to what Torian remembered from their journey beneath the mountains. Go now, the Watcher urged. I cannot maintain this opening for long. Torian led the way, stepping into the golden passage with Arista and Haleth close behind. The sensation was disorienting, momentary feeling of weightlessness, followed by a pulling sensation, as if they were being drawn forward by some invisible force. The passage stretched before them, bending and twisting in ways that defied physical space. Unlike their previous experience, where the journey had seemed almost instantaneous. This transit was perceptibly a rushing movement through golden light that seemed to last minutes rather than seconds. And then, abruptly, they were elsewhere standing on a rocky beach beneath the twilight sky, waves crashing against dark stones at their feet. The passage sealed behind them with a sound like a sigh, leaving them alone on the shore of what could only be tall Fuin, the Isle of Night. The island lived up to its ominous name. Even in the fading light, they could see that vegetation was sparse and twisted, trees growing in unnatural configurations that suggested pain rather than natural adaptation to wind and weather. The air carried a metallic taste, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with slow, irregular rhythm, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. 3 days, Torian reminded his companions as they oriented themselves. Let's not waste a moment. They moved inland from the beach, following a ravine that cut through rocky cliffs toward the island's interior. Their quest for the earth from Angban's foundations had begun a race against time on an island steeped in ancient evil, with forces of darkness potentially already alerted to their presence. Behind them, the sun disappeared completely below the horizon, plunging tall Fuin into a darkness deeper than natural night should allow. And somewhere in that darkness, something stirred awakened by their arrival. Or perhaps never truly sleeping in this place where Morgoth's influence had once held sway. Darkness fell over tall Fuin with unnatural swiftness, as if the island itself rejected the light. Torian, Arista, and Haleth made their way inland through the ravine, guided by the faint glow of stars overhead and the pendant at Torian's throat, which emitted a soft radiance that pushed back the worst of the gloom. The ravine widened as they progressed, opening into a valley flanked by jagged hills whose silhouettes resembled teeth against the night sky. Vegetation grew more abundant here, but wrong trees with trunks that twisted in spirals, leaves that seemed to curl away from their approach, and flowers that closed rather than opened under starlight. This place feels aware, Haleth observed, his ranger's instincts heightened by the island's oppressive atmosphere. Not just corrupted, but conscious in some fundamental way. Morgoth's influence ran deep, Arista explained, his voice hushed as if reluctant to disturb the unnatural silence. Angband was not merely his fortress, but an extension of his will, shaped by his thought over millennia. This fragment, thrust upward when the land was remade, retains echoes of that consciousness. They made camp in what appeared to be the most defensible position of Valia Small, clearings surrounded by boulders that offered some protection from whatever might lurk in the deeper darkness beyond. No fire seemed wise. The island's awareness might be drawn to such a normal, life-firming presence. As they ate a cold meal from their provisions, Torian removed one of the crystal vials containing water from Olmo's wells. Its glow had intensified since their arrival on the island, as if responding to the lingering corruption around them. The Watcher said this would react most strongly near the earth we seek, he reminded his companions. Tomorrow at first light, we'll use it to guide our search. Sleep came uneasily, disturbed by dreams that seemed to seep from the ground, itself visions of vast chambers beneath mountains, of fires that burned cold rather than hot, of creatures shaped by a will that delighted in twisting natural forms into mockeries of their original design. Torian woke several times, each instance finding the pendant at his throat glowing more brightly, as if working to shield him from the island's malevolent influence. Dawn brought little improvement to their surroundings. Sunlight filtered through a perpetual haze that hung over the island, casting everything in a sickly, yellowish glow. Details hidden by darkness now revealed themselves as the extent of the corruption evident in every aspect of the landscape. What had appeared to be ordinary stones were revealed as fragments of ancient structures, their surfaces carved with symbols that hurt the eye to look upon directly. The soil itself had an oily sheen, and in places it seemed to shift and settle as if breathing. "We should move quickly," Arista advised, studying their surroundings with scholarly detachment that barely masked his unease. "This island's influence will affect us more strongly the longer we remain." They broke camp efficiently, leaving as little trace of their presence as possible. Torian uncorked the crystal vial, holding it before him as they began to explore the valley more thoroughly. The water's glow remained steady but did not intensify, suggesting the earth they sought lay elsewhere. They followed the valley as it curved northward, the terrain gradually rising toward what appeared to be the island's central highlands. The vegetation thinned as they ascended, giving way to bare rock interspersed with patches of that same oily soil. Here, the water in the vial began to respond more noticeably, its glow pulsing with increasing frequency. "We're getting closer," Torian observed, watching the vial's reaction carefully. The resonance grows stronger. The path narrowed as they continued upward, becoming a treacherous track along a ridge that overlooked a vast depression in the island's center. From this vantage point, they could see that Tor Fuin was essentially a ring of highlands surrounding a central crater, perhaps the collapsed remains of a massive structure. "There," Aelith said suddenly, pointing to a feature on the crater's far side. "Does that look natural to you?" Torian followed his gesture and saw what had caught the ranger's attention, perfect arch of black stone standing alone on the crater's rim, framing nothing but the hazy sky beyond. Even at this distance, there was something distinctly wrong about its proportions, its angles somehow both precise and unsettling. "Not natural," Arista confirmed, and reminiscent of descriptions in our oldest records of the gates of Angband, itself smeller, of course, but similar in design. The water in the vial pulsed more rapidly as Torian turned it toward the distant arch, confirming their suspicion. "That's where we need to go," he said. "The earth we seek must be near that structure." They descended into the crater, finding its floor covered with a fine, black dust that rose in small clouds with each step, clinging to their clothing and skin with unusual persistence. The air grew heavier as they crossed this desolate plain, the metallic taste in their mouths intensifying until it became difficult to ignore. "Something watches us," Haleth warned, his hand moving to his sword hilt. "I feel eyes tracking our movement." Torian had sensed it to a presence that seemed to permeate the very air around them. Observing with cold intelligence, the pendant at his throat had grown almost uncomfortably warm. Its light steady but intense, as if straining against some opposing force. They reached the crater's far side without incident, though the feeling of being observed never diminished. The black arch loomed above them now. Its material, unlike any stone Torian had encountered in his centuries of life, not merely dark, but seeming to absorb light that fell upon it, creating an outline of deeper shadow against the hazy sky. The path leading up to the arch was paved with the same material, forming steps that were too precisely spaced for comfort, forcing an unnatural rhythm to their ascent. As they climbed, the water in the vial Torian carried began to glow so brightly it was difficult to look at directly, confirming they approached what they sought. At the arch's threshold, they paused. Beyond it lay what appeared to be the remains of a courtyard or plaza, its surface cracked and broken, but still recognizable as artificial construction. At its center stood a pedestal of that same light-absorbing black material, supporting nothing but empty, waiting. "This feels like a trap," Haleth observed quietly. "Too convenient, too obvious." Perhaps Arista allowed, but the water's reaction cannot be denied. What we seek is here, whether by coincidence or design. Torian studied the arch itself more carefully, noting details that had not been visible from a distance. Symbols had been carved into its surface in it, the flowing script of elves, or the angular runes of dwarves, but something older, more primal. They seemed to shift slightly when viewed directly, rearranging themselves in subtle ways that suggested meaning just beyond comprehension. "We proceed together," he decided. "Stay alert for any change in our surroundings, any sign of threat." They stepped through the arch as one, weapons ready. The courtyard beyond felt immediately different from the rest of the island, air colder, the silence deeper, the sense of being watched more intense. The pedestal at its center drew their attention like a lodestone, the water in Torian's vial now pulsing in perfect rhythm with the pendant at his throat. As they approached the pedestal, the ground beneath their feet changed. What had appeared to be ordinary stone from a distance revealed itself as something else. Anti-relic black soil veined with a metal that resembled iron but was not, exactly as the Watcher had described. It had a luster that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and in places it formed patterns that suggested deliberate arrangement rather than natural formation. "This is it," Torian confirmed, kneeling to examine the material more closely. The earth from Angban's foundations. Arista joined him, producing the specialized containers Lord Elrond had provided for transporting the substance. "We should work quickly," he advised. "This place, it feels as if it resents our presence, our purpose." They began carefully collecting samples of the soil, ensuring they included portions where the strange metal was most concentrated. The material was heavier than it appeared, with an unnatural coldness that penetrated even through the enchanted containers. As they worked, the feeling of being observed intensified. The air around them seemed to thicken, pressure building as if before a storm. The pendant at Torian's throat grew almost painfully hot. its light now forming a protective sphere around the three companions. "Something comes," Haleth warned, rising to his feet with sword drawn. "Something drawn by our actions." Torian secured the last container of earth and stood, scanning their surroundings. The courtyard remained empty, but the arch through which they had entered had changed. Darkness gathered within its frame, deeper and more absolute than natural shadow. From this darkness emerged a figure that caused all three companions to tense in recognition. A void walker, similar to the one they had encountered in the high pass, but larger, its armor more elaborate and ancient in design. It moved with that same unnatural fluidity, crossing the courtyard toward them with measured steps that made no sound against the stone. But it was not alone. Behind it came others, not void walkers, but something else entirely. Humanoid in basic form, but wrong in ways that defied easy description. Their proportions were slightly off limbs, too long or bent at angles that should not have been possible. Their skin, where visible beneath tattered remnants of ancient armor, had the same oily sheen as the corrupted soil. And their faces, "Don't look directly at them," Arista warned sharply. "Those are not faces meant for mortal eyes to comprehend." Torian had already averted his gaze, having caught a glimpse of features that seemed to shift and flow, suggesting multiple overlapping visages rather than a single, stable countenance. The sight had sent a spike of pain through his mind, like trying to understand a language never meant for human or elven comprehension. "What are they?" Haleth asked, his voice tight with controlled fear as he kept his eyes fixed on the creatures' torsos rather than their faces. "Morgoth's experiments," Arista replied grimly. "Beings he created by merging his servants with something else. Something from beyond the circles of the world. They were thought destroyed when Angband fell." "Evidently not all of them," Torian observed. He counted at least 6 of the twisted beings flanking the Void Walker as they spread out to surround the pedestal where the companions stood. "The earth," the Void Walker spoke, its voice the same discordant harmony Torian remembered from their previous encounter. "Return it to its resting place. It is not meant for your kind to possess." "We take only what is necessary," Torian replied, hand moving to the pendant at his throat. "For a ritual to contain corruption that threatens all of Terenna, including whatever remains of your kind." "Containment," the Void Walker echoed, the words somehow twisted into something mocking. "You seek to contain what cannot be contained. The barriers between worlds thin. The void reaches through. What was bound will be freed. Not if we succeed," Torian countered. He glanced at his companions, a silent signal passing between them. They needed to break through the encircling enemies, reach the arch, and return to the eastern shore where the Watcher would reopen the passage in 2 days' time. The Void Walker seemed to sense their intent. It raised a hand, and the twisted beings moved closer. Their movements jerky yet coordinated, like puppets controlled by a single puppeteer. "You will not leave this place," it declared. "The earth returns to its resting place. Your bones joined those who came before, seeking what was not theirs to take." Torian's hand closed around the pendant, drawing strength from its warmth. "We did not come unprepared," he said, and in one swift motion He pulled the crystal vial from his belt and hurled it at the Voidwalker's feet. The vial shattered, releasing the water from almost wells in a splash that seemed to expand beyond natural physics. Droplets hanging in the air longer than they should. Where this sacred water touched the Voidwalker, its form began to unravel just as had happened in the High Pasama, crumbling to reveal the void stuff beneath. But these effects were less dramatic than before, the creature's dissolution slower and less complete. It staggered but did not fall, portions of its form remaining intact despite the water's purifying power. The pendant Arista called. "Use it as you did against Morathiel." Torian understood immediately. He tore the pendant from around his neck and hurled it directly at the wounded Voidwalker. The crystal struck true, embedding itself in the creature's chest where the armor had crumbled away. Light exploded outward, not the soft glow the pendant had emitted before, but a searing radiance that forced all three companions to shield their eyes. The Voidwalker made a sound like tearing fabric, its form collapsing inward as the pendant's light burned away the connection between its void essence and physical manifestation. The twisted beings around it reacted with equal distress, their bodies contorting in ways that suggested pain beyond mortal understanding. "Now," Torian shouted. Through the arch, they ran, Arista clutching the containers of earth they had collected, Haleth and Torian with weapons drawn to clear any opposition. The twisted beings were disoriented by their master's destruction, moving erratically rather than coordinating to block their escape. They reached the arch and passed through, the pendant's light still visible behind them, illuminating the courtyard with unnatural brightness. As they descended the steps beyond, Torian glanced back in time to see the light coalesce into a sphere that hung suspended where the Voidwalker had stood, pulsing with increasing intensity. "Faster," he urged his companions. "Something's happening." The warning came too late. The sphere of light expanded suddenly, engulfing the entire courtyard in a flash of radiance that momentarily turned night to day across the island. A shockwave followed, knocking all three companions off their feet as it passed over them. When Torian regained his senses, he found the landscape transformed. The black arch had collapsed, its perfect form now just a pile of rubble. The courtyard beyond was gone, replaced by a smoking crater, and most concerning of all, the pendant was nowhere to be seen, presumably destroyed in the magical backlash it had created. "Is everyone all right?" he called, pushing himself to his feet. Arista and Haleth responded in the affirmative, though both looked shaken by the experience. The ranger had a cut above one eye that bled freely, and Arista moved with the careful precision of one nursing bruised ribs. "The earth?" Torian asked urgently. Arista patted the pack where he had secured the containers. "Safe. All samples intact." "Then we should move," Torian decided, scanning their surroundings. "That display will have attracted attention from anything else that dwells on this island." They retreated down the crater's slope, heading east toward the shore where they had arrived. Without the pendant's guidance, navigation became more challenging, but Haleth's ranger training proved invaluable as he identified landmarks they had passed on their inward journey. The island seemed different in the aftermath of the Void Walker's destructionless, oppressive somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from the very air. The haze that had obscured the sun thinned slightly, allowing more natural light to reach the ground. Even the twisted vegetation appeared less actively malevolent, merely corrupted rather than consciously hostile. The Void Walker's presence was maintaining some of the island's worst aspects, Arista theorized as they made their way through the valley they had traversed earlier. A lingering guardian, perhaps, left to ensure Morgoth's influence continued even after Angban's fall. One less servant of darkness in the world, Haleth observed, though at the cost of your pendant. Torian felt the absence of the crystal's weight and warmth acutely. A necessary sacrifice. Without it, we would not have escaped with the earth we sought. They reached the eastern shore by nightfall, finding the beach where they had arrived unchanged. 2 days remained before the Watcher would reopen the passage to Revendelltwo, days they would need to spend on this island of ancient evil, albeit one now slightly less dangerous with the Voidwalker's destruction. They established a camp in a sheltered cove, taking turns at watch through the night. The dreams that had plagued them on their first night returned, but less intensely, less invasively. The island's awareness seemed diminished, its attention no longer focused so acutely on the intruders who had disturbed its long isolation. The following day, they explored the immediate area, seeking anything that might prove useful for their broader mission. Arista discovered ruins, half buried in the sandy soil above the beach remnants of what might have been a watchtower or signal station from Angban's days as Morgoth's fortress. The island was likely larger once, he explained as they examined the ancient stonework. This would have stood on a promontory overlooking the sea, warning of approaching vessels. Within these ruins, they found artifacts of disturbing design weapons, forged from the same strange metal that veined the earth they had collected. Tools whose purpose could only be guessed at, and fragments of armor sized for beings larger than elves or men. Arista carefully documented these findings in a small journal he carried, while Haleth discovered something of more immediate, practical value: a chamber, partially protected from the elements, where they could shelter more comfortably for their final night on the island. That evening, as they ate the last of their provisions in this ancient shelter, Torian's thoughts turned to what awaited them upon their return. 2 components secured, he observed. One remaining flame from All's forges, preserved in Kazudim. The most dangerous to obtain, Arista noted grimly. Kazudim has been abandoned for centuries, its depths now home to creatures that drove even the dwarves from their greatest kingdom. What drove them out? Haleth asked. The tales that reached the Starblood speak only of some nameless horror awakened in the deep places. Durin's Bane, the dwarves called it, Arista replied. Its true nature remains uncertain, but the wisest among us fear it may be a Balroga, fire demon from the First Age, a servant of Morgoth who escaped the War of Wrath and hid in the depths of the earth. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If a Balrog truly dwelled in Kazadim, retrieving the flame from All's forges would mean venturing into the domain of one of the most terrible creatures ever to walk. Tyrrhena a being of shadow and flame that had slain countless elves and men during the wars of the Elder Days. We'll face that challenge when we return to Rivendell, Torian said finally. For now, we focus on surviving our remaining time here and ensuring the earth we've collected reaches Lord Elrond safely. The final night on Torfuin passed without incident, the island seemingly content to let them depart with what they had taken. As sunset approached on the third day, they returned to the exact spot on the eastern shore where they had arrived, watching the horizon with growing anticipation as the sun began its descent toward the sea. "Do you think the Watcher will know what happened?" Haleth asked. "That the pendant was destroyed?" "Almost certainly," Arista replied. "Such artifacts maintain connections to their makers. He likely felt its destruction the moment it occurred." The sun touched the horizon, its light turning the ocean to molten gold. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. The sun continued its descent, the light fading gradually from the sky, and no golden passage appeared on the shore. "Could our battle with the Voidwalker have disrupted something?" Haleth suggested, concern evident in his voice. "Change the island in ways that prevent the passage from opening." Before Arista or Torian could respond, the air before them rippled not, the smooth, controlled parting they had witnessed in Rivendell, but something rougher, as if the fabric of reality were being torn rather than neatly folded aside. Golden light spilled through this ragged opening, forming a passage similar to the one that had brought them to the island, but visibly less stable, its edges fluctuating and wavering like flame and wind. The Watcher's voice reached them, though he himself remained unseen. Quickly, "The disruption caused by the pendant's destruction has made establishing the passage more difficult. I cannot maintain it for long." They needed no further urging. Torian led the way, stepping into the golden light with Arista and Haleth close behind. The sensation of transit was more violent this time not merely the weightlessness and pulling they had experienced before, but a turbulence that threatened to tear them from the path, casting them into whatever lay between the defined points of their journey. Torian focused his thoughts on Rivendell, on the terrace where they had departed, on Lord Elrond waiting for their return. The turbulence seemed to respond to this mental discipline, calming slightly as they progressed through the golden passage. The journey felt longer than their transit to Torfuin had been, the passage stretching endlessly before them until Torian began to fear they had somehow been diverted from their intended destination. Then, without warning, the golden light vanished, and they found themselves standing not on the terrace in Rivendell, but in a forest clearing under stars that suggested they were indeed somewhere in Tyrrhena, but not where they had intended to arrive. "Where are we?" Haleth asked, scanning their surroundings with a ranger's practiced eye. Before Torian could respond, a figure stepped from the shadows at the clearing's Edgeth Watcher himself, his ageless face showing signs of strain that had not been present before. "Forgive the imprecision," he said, by way of greeting. "The pendant's destruction created complications. I could not maintain the passage's stability enough to deliver you directly to Rivendell." "Where have we arrived?" Arista asked, adjusting the pack containing their precious cargo of earth from Angban's foundations. The eastern borders of Fangorn Forest, the Watcher replied. Approximately 3 days' journey from the Gap of Rohan, which would be your most direct route toward Rivendell. Torian calculated quickly. That would mean at least 2 weeks of travel to reach Imladris, perhaps more depending on conditions in the mountains. I cannot transport you further, the Watcher admitted. The working that created the passage to Torfuin and back has depleted my ability to manipulate such energies for a time. You must complete your journey by conventional means. The water from Olmo's wells, Arista said with sudden concern. It will lose its power before we can reach Rivendell on foot. The Watcher nodded grimly. A complication I had not anticipated. The pendant's destruction, the battle with the Void Walker on Tall Fuinthe's events have accelerated certain processes, created ripples in the fabric of reality that make our timeline even more pressing. What options remain to us? Torian asked directly. The Watcher considered this, his gaze turning northward as if seeing beyond the physical landscape to possibilities and pathways hidden from mortal perception. There may be a way, he said finally. Not without risk, but potentially our best hope of completing the ritual before the water's power fades entirely. He gestured for them to follow, leading them through the ancient trees of Fangorn's border to where a small stream cut through the forest floor. Kneeling beside this water, he passed his hand over its surface, causing ripples that spread outward in patterns too precise to be natural. This stream connects to the Entwash, which flows eventually to the Anduin, he explained. The great rivers of Tyrena maintain connections beyond mere physical geography, form a network that those with the proper knowledge can utilize for communication, or, in dire circumstances, transportation. River magic, Arista observed with scholarly interest. Mentioned in our oldest records, but thought lost with the changing of the world. Not lost, the Watcher corrected. Merely forgotten by most. The Ents remember, though they rarely employ such methods themselves. And I, he smiled faintly. I was tasked with knowing many things others have forgotten. He continued his manipulation of the stream's surface, the ripples now forming distinct patterns that resembled writing in a flowing script none of the companions recognized. I can create a pathway through the river network that will carry you swiftly northward, he explained. Not directly to Rivendell, which lies beyond the reach of even the greatest rivers, but to the Bruinen's southernmost tributary. From there, it would be less than 2 days' journey to Lord Elrond's realm, fast enough to arrive before the water loses its power. Torian pressed. If you depart immediately, yes, the Watcher confirmed. But understand the nature of this. Journey you will not travel upon the rivers, but through them. You will be part of the water itself for a time, your physical forms temporarily transformed to match the medium that carries you. The implications were both fascinating and disturbing. Is such a transformation safe for mortals? Haleth asked, understandable concern in his voice. For brief periods, yes, the Watcher assured him, though you may find the experience disorienting. Your consciousness will remain your own, but your perception will alter to match your temporary state. After brief deliberation, they agreed this river path represented their best hope of reaching Rivendell in time. The Watcher completed his preparations, the patterns on the stream's surface now glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to penetrate the water rather than merely reflect from it. "Step into the stream when ready," he instructed. "Focus your thoughts on your destinations, Bruinen and Rivendell beyond. The rivers will respond to this intent, carrying you along the most direct route possible." "What of our possessions?" Arista asked practically. "The containers of earth, our weapons and equipment. Keep them close as you enter the water," the Watcher advised. "The transformation will encompass what you carry as extensions of yourselves. When you emerge, all should be restored as it was." They made final adjustments to their packs, ensuring the containers of earth were secured as firmly as possible. Torian addressed the Watcher one last time before they departed. "The pendant, I regret its loss. It served us well. It fulfilled its purpose," the Watcher replied without apparent regret, "and in doing so, removed another servant of darkness from the world. A fair exchange, by any measure." "Will we see you again?" Haleth asked. "When we seek the final component flame from all's forges. Our paths will cross once more before the end," the Watcher confirmed, "though perhaps not as you expect. Now Goth River Path is established, but it will not remain viable indefinitely." With final nods of farewell, they stepped into the stream, one by one, first Torian, then Arista, and finally Haleth. The water felt normal for only a moment before the blue glow intensified, surrounding each of them in a cocoon of light that seemed to dissolve the boundaries between flesh and liquid. The transformation was not painful, but profoundly strange, a sensation of expanding and contracting simultaneously, of losing definition while gaining a new form of awareness that extended far beyond normal perception. Torian felt his consciousness stretch along the stream's course, connecting to the larger flows it joined, becoming aware of the vast network of rivers that veined the lands of Tyrannus. Communication between the companions became wordless, intuitive thoughts and impressions flowing between them as naturally as water finding its level. They moved with the current, accelerating as the stream joined larger waterways, their perception shifting to encompass miles rather than mere feet of progress. The journey through the river network was a blur of impressions rather than distinct observation slips of landscapes from a perspective no land-bound traveler could experience. Awareness of creatures that dwelled within the waters they temporarily shared, and occasionally brief connections to other consciousnesses that seemed to recognize and acknowledge their passage before fading back into the background flow of the river's eternal movement. Time lost meaning in this state. Progress measured in confluences passed, and tributaries joined rather than hours or days. They flowed northward, following the great Anduin before branching westward into smaller rivers that led toward the misty mountains. Always, the thought of Rivendell guided them, drawing them toward the Bruinen and its source in the valley of Imladress. The return to physical form, when it finally came, was as disorienting as the initial transformation had been. Torian felt himself condensing boundaries re-establishing between self and surroundings, awareness contracting from the vast network of rivers to the immediate environment of a single body. They emerged from the water onto a pebbly shore, their possessions intact as the Watcher had promised. The stream they had exited was indeed a tributary of the Bruinen, recognizable from its clear, swift-flowing waters and the distinctive rock formations that lined its banks. That was Haleth began, then shook his head, apparently unable to find words adequate to describe the experience. Remarkable, Arista supplied, his scholarly interest evident despite the disorientation they all clearly felt. To experience the world as water dose flowing, connecting, part of a greater whole while maintaining individual identity. Torian checked their position against the stars, confirming they had indeed arrived where the Watcher had intended. "We're less than 2 days from Rivendell," he announced. "If we travel without rest, we could arrive by tomorrow evening." "The Earth?" Arista asked, reaching for his pack with sudden concern. Torian helped him check the specialized containers, finding them intact and their contents undisturbed. The strange soil from Angban's foundations remained as they had collected it, still veined with that light-absorbing metal, still radiating a subtle wrongness that set it apart from ordinary earth. 2 components secured, Haleth observed as they repacked their belongings. The water and the earth. Only the flame remains. And the most dangerous journey yet, Torian reminded him. Into Khazad-dûm, where even the dwarves fear to tread. They set out immediately, following the Bruinen's course upstream toward Rivendell. The familiar landscape of the river valley was a welcome change from Tall Fuin's corrupted terrain, though Torian noted signs that even here the shadow's influence had grown during their absence evitation, withered in patterns that suggested corruption rather than natural decay. And twice they encountered animals that moved with the jerky, unnatural coordination he had come to associate with. The corruption spreads faster than before, Arista observed after they passed a grove of trees whose leaves had blackened and curled into configurations that mimicked faces in silent scream. The dagger's power, amplified by whatever entity now wields it at Dol Guldur. "All the more reason to complete our mission swiftly," Torian replied. "To perform the ritual of containment before these manifestations grow beyond our ability to counter." They traveled through the night, resting only briefly when absolute exhaustion demanded it. By mid-morning of the following day, they reached the borders of Rivendell's influencia, subtle but unmistakable transition, where the air grew cleaner, the light clearer, and the oppressive sense of being watched by hostile forces faded to nothing. Elven sentries greeted them with evident relief, escorting them immediately to the last homely house where Lord Elrond awaited their return. The Master of Rivendell received them in his private study rather than the more formal council chamber, a sign of both the urgency of their mission and his personal concern for their welfare. "You have succeeded," he observed, noting the packs they carried carefully. "Though not without cost, I perceive." The pendant was destroyed in confrontation with a Void Walker on Tall Fuin, Torian confirmed. "But we secured what we sought from Angban's foundations, as the Watcher described." Arista carefully unpacked the containers, placing them on a table prepared for this purpose. Lord Elrond examined the contents with cautious interest, not touching the strange soil directly, but studying its properties with the experienced eye of one who had encountered many forms of power, both benign and malevolent. "This will serve," he confirmed after thorough examination. "Its resonance with the binding is strong. I can sense it even without magical enhancement." He looked up at the three companions, his expression grave, but not without hope. Two components secured, one remaining. The ritual of containment comes closer to possibility. "What news from the woodland realm?" Torian asked. "Has there been word of King Elrond's diversionary attack on Dol Guldur?" "Some," Elrond replied. "Our watchers in the mountains report increased movement of dark creatures eastward, suggesting the elven force has indeed drawn attention and resources away from other fronts. But no direct communication has reached Oost's paths between our realms grow more dangerous by the day, and the frame," Torian pressed. "Has Arathon appeared again? Has he sent any further warnings?" "Once," Elrond confirmed. "Briefly, 3 nights past. Linda was on guard duty and witnessed it. Arathon's form was weaker, more transparent, but his message was clear enough to read from his lips. They come in greater numbers now. The binding weakens faster than before." The implications were troubling but not unexpected. The void entity at Dol Guldur, now in possession of the dagger, would naturally focus its efforts on weakening the binding that held Mirithland by extension. Arathon beyond the reach of the physical world. "Then we must proceed to the final component without delay," Torian decided. "The flame from All's forges, preserved in Khazad-dûm." "I have been researching this matter in your absence," Elrond said, moving to a table covered with ancient maps and texts. The flame was indeed maintained in the deepest hall of Khazad-dûm, what the dwarves called the Chamber of Eternal Fire, according to their records. It burned without fuel, a gift from Aula himself to his children at the founding of their greatest kingdom. And it remains, even after the dwarves were driven out? Haleth asked. "So, our best information suggests," Elrond replied. "The nature of this flame is such that it cannot be extinguished by conventional means. It may have diminished without the dwarves tending, but it should still burn deep in the heart of the mountain. How do we reach it?" Torian asked the practical question. "Khazad-dûm is vast, a labyrinth of halls and passages spanning the entire width of the Misty Mountains. Without guides who know its layout, I have addressed this concern as well," Elrond assured him. He unrolled a large map on the table, clearly dwarven in origin, its precise lines and angular script depicting the major halls and passages of Khazad-dûm in remarkable detail. "This was provided by Balin, who accompanied you to the binding ritual. The dwarves of the Deep Forge maintain records of their ancestral home, though few have ventured there in recent centuries." They gathered around the map, studying the complex network of passages, halls, and chambers that formed the greatest dwarven kingdom ever established in Tibrinor. The Chamber of Eternal Fire was indeed located in the deepest level, accessible only through a series of increasingly restricted passages designed to limit access to this most sacred space. The eastern entrance would be our most direct route, Arista observed, tracing a path from the Dimral Dale to the lower levels. Though that brings us closer to the depths where Durin's Bane is said to dwell. A risk we must accept, Torian replied. Time grows too short for a more circuitous approach. They spent the remainder of the day planning the expedition to Khazad-dûm, determining what equipment would be needed, what dangers might be encountered, and who should comprise the company. Unlike their journey to Tor Fuin, this mission would require a larger group. The darkness beneath the mountains was too great. The potential threats too numerous for just 3 travelers to face alone. I will accompany you, Elrond announced, surprising all present. The flame from All's forges is not merely hot but magical in nature. Capturing and transporting it will require skills beyond those of even the most accomplished warriors or scouts. My lord, Arista began, clearly concerned. Your presence here maintains Rivendell's defenses. If you were to fall beneath the mountains, a calculated risk, Elrond replied firmly. Without the flame, there can be no ritual of containment. Without the ritual, Rivendell's defenses will eventually fail, regardless, as the corruption spreads. Better to risk all on a single venture that might save all than to maintain a temporary safety while doom approaches unchecked. With this decision made, they selected the remainder of the company Linda for his sensitivity to magical energies, particularly those related to the relics. Glorfindel, the legendary warrior who had returned from death to serve the house of Elrond, and 2 of Rivendell's most experienced scouts, familiar with the eastern approaches to the Misty Mountains. Haleth volunteered to remain in Rivendell, coordinating with any rangers who might arrive with news or assistance. My skills lie in the wild places beneath open sky, he explained. In the depths of Khazad-dûm, I would be of less use than those accustomed to moving in darkness and confined spaces. Preparations continued into the evening, equipment gathered and modified for the specific challenges they would face. Special containers were crafted for transporting the flam crystal vessels lined with mithril, one of the few materials that could withstand the magical fire's unique properties. As night fell over Rivendell, Torian found himself drawn to the chamber where the frame was kept. With Lindai's permission, he entered this sacred space alone, approaching the pool that surrounded the platform where the relic stood. The frame appeared unchanged since he had last seen Ita's simple rectangle of silver, now solid black where once it had been empty space. Its surface rippled occasionally, like water disturbed by a breeze, though the air in the chamber was perfectly still. Arathon Torian said quietly, uncertain whether his friend could hear him across the void that separated them. We have secured 2 components for the ritual of containment. Only the flame remains. Hold on a little longer, my friend. We're coming. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the frame's surface shifted. Not the random ripples he had observed before, but a paterna face forming briefly in the darkness, features strained but recognizable. Arathon's face, gaunt and weary but still himself, still fighting to maintain the binding despite the forces working to break it. No words came through, no sound of any kind. but Torian could read the expression in his friend's eyes: determination, acknowledgement, and something that might have been hope. Then the face faded, the frame's surface returning to its previous state of occasional, random movement. Torian remained in the chamber for some time afterward, drawing strength and resolve from this brief connection. Tomorrow they would depart for Khazad-dûm, facing perhaps the greatest danger yet in their quest to complete the ritual of containment. The flame from All's forges awaited them in the deepest hall of the Dwarven Kingdom if they could reach it, if they could secure it, if they could return with it intact. 3 significant ifs, each representing a challenge that might prove insurmountable. But they had come too far, risked too much, to turn back now. Arathon still fought his lonely battle within the frame, containing Morathil through sheer force of will. The least Torian could do was fight with equal determination here in the world of light and life. For Arathon, for the binding, for all of Tyrana, increasingly threatened by shadows both old and new. The path lay before them, leading into darkness beneath the mountains. All that remained was to walk it, one step at a time, wherever it might lead. Dawn broke over Rivendell as the company prepared for their journey to Khazad-dûm. The valley's natural beauty seemed heightened in the early morning light, as if the very land sought to remind them of what they fought to preserve. Torian stood on a balcony overlooking the waterfalls, committing the scene to memorial moment of peace before they ventured into darkness. Lord Elrond joined him there, already dressed for travel in practical garments rarely seen on the Master of Rivendell. Gone were the flowing robes of state, replaced by sturdy leathers and a mithril-lined cloak that shimmered faintly in the morning light. A sword of ancient design hung at his hip-knot had Hoffen, his ceremonial blade, but a weapon forged specifically for combat in confined spaces. The others are ready, Elrond informed him. We depart within the hour. Torian nodded, his own preparations complete. Have the scouts confirmed our route through the mountains? As much as possible, Elrond replied. The eastern entrance to Khazad-dûm remains accessible, though long abandoned. The dwarves sealed the western gates when they fled, but the Dimral Gate was too massive for such measures. It stands open still, according to our latest intelligence. And within, Torian asked the question that concerned them all. Any sign of what awaits us? Elrond's expression grew grave. Nothing definitive. Creatures have been seen entering and living orcs primarily, but also things less easily identified. Shadows that move against the light, forms that seem not fully substantial. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. And there are disturbances in the deeper currents of power, ripples that suggest something ancient stirs beneath the mountains. Durin's bane, Torian said quietly. Perhaps Elrond aloud, or perhaps merely echoes of its presence, reverberating through stone that has contained its malice for centuries. They joined the others in the courtyard below, where final preparations were underway. Glorfindel supervised the distribution of supplies, his golden hair gleaming in the morning sun, his manner calm and assured despite the dangers that lay ahead. The twice-born warrior had faced a Balrog once before, in the fall of Gondolin ages past. That confrontation had cost him his life. though the Valar had eventually returned him to Terena for purposes not fully revealed even to Elrond. Lindor and the two scouts, Amda and Nendor, brothers who had patrolled the eastern approaches to the Misty Mountains for Century Eshect, their weapons and equipment with the methodical precision of those accustomed to venturing into dangerous territory. Special attention was paid to the crystal vessels lined with mithril, designed to capture and contain a portion of the flame from All's forges. These will maintain the flame's magical properties while preventing it from consuming everything around it, Elrond explained, demonstrating how the vessel's seals functioned. But they are not indestructible. Treat them with utmost care, especially once filled. Haleth approached as they prepared to depart, offering a ranger's blessing for their journey. "May the stars guide your path through darkness," he said formally. "The rangers will maintain watch over Rivendell in your absence, Lord Elrond. None shall pass our guard uninvited." "I leave the valley in capable hands," Elrond acknowledged. "If we have not returned within 10 days, assume our mission has failed. In that event, you must take the water and earth. We have gathered and seek another way to complete the ritual, perhaps, with the Watcher's direct assistance, if he can be contacted again." With these somber instructions delivered, they set out from Rivendell, following the eastern path that would lead them through the foothills and eventually to the Dimril Dale, where the eastern entrance to Khazad-dûm awaited. The journey would take 3 days, if all went well to reach the mountain's edge, and 1 to ascend to the Dimril Gate. They traveled swiftly but cautiously, alert for signs of the corruptions spread even in lands traditionally protected by elven influence. Such signs were increasingly evident as they moved eastward with the vegetation arranged in unnatural patterns. Animals that moved with jerky coordination suggesting external control, and occasionally patches of ground that seemed to pulse with subtle wrongness, as if the very soil had been infected with something alien. "The corruption spreads faster than before," Erister observed, as they passed a stream whose waters ran black for several yards before clearing again. "The dagger's influence, amplified by whatever entity now controls it at Dol Guldur. All the more reason to complete our mission swiftly," Elrond replied. "The ritual of containment must be performed before these manifestations grow beyond our ability to counter." They encountered no direct opposition during the first 2 days of their journey, though the scouts reported increased movement in the lands around them, creatures traveling with apparent purpose rather than merely wandering, all heading toward some destination not immediately evident. "They converge on something," Amda reported after scouting ahead on the second evening. "Not us. Specificalized paths would be more direct if we were their target. But something draws them eastward and southward." "Dol Guldur," Torian suggested. "The void entity gathering its forces, perhaps in response to Elrond's attack, or in preparation for some new offensive," Glorfindel added grimly. "If it seeks to extend its influence more actively, it would need servants to carry out its will across distances." They doubled their vigilance after this observation, traveling more cautiously despite the pressing need for haste. The third day brought them to the foothills of the Misty Mountains proper, the terrain growing steeper and more rugged as they began their ascent toward the Dimril Dale. Here, signs of corruption became less frequent but more intense when encountering not the subtle wrongness they had observed in the lowlands, but active manifestations of void. They passed a grove of trees whose trunks had twisted to form a perfect spiral pattern, branches intertwined to create a dome-like structure at its center. Within this natural cathedral, the ground had been cleared in geometric patterns that hurt the eye to follow directly. A focus point, Elrond explained, studying the site from a safe distance. A place where the barrier between worlds has been deliberately thinned, creating a pathway for influence to flow more easily from the void into our reality. Should we destroy it? Glorfindel asked, hand moving to his sword hilt. Elrond considered briefly, then shook his head. Not without proper preparation. Disrupting such a structure without the correct countermeasures might actually worsen the breach, allowing more corruption to pour through rather than less. The binding weakens. The relics whisper louder. The next chapter awaits. Continue the journey in Part 4.